First contact. The crystalline spires of Nova Celestra caught the light of 3 moons, sending rainbow fractals dancing across the diplomatic chamber. Cassandra stood alone, as always, her silvery skin refracting light like fresh fallen snow. The crown of crystal shards hovering above her head marked her as the heir to the Celestian throne, and carrier of their most terrible curse. "Your radiance," the servant's voice quavered even through the communication crystal. "The human delegation has arrived." Cassandra didn't turn. She couldn't risk meeting anyone's gaze, not even through a crystal projection. "Very well. Have them escorted to the frost chamber. I will receive them there." As the servant's projection dissolved, Cassandra allowed herself a moment of weakness, pressing her hand against the window. Frost immediately spread from her touch, creating delicate patterns across the crystalline surface. 23 years she had lived with this curse, unable to look upon her own people without turning them to ice. And now humans were coming, warm-blooded, emotional creatures who would no doubt see her as nothing more than a monster. The diplomatic mission was crucial, she knew that. Earth needed Celestra's crystal technology, and Celestra needed Earth's renewable energy systems. But bringing humans into the heart of their crystal city was dangerous. One wrong look, one moment of lost control, and she could freeze them solid. James Nash stood at the shuttle viewport, watching the alien city grow larger. After 15 years in the diplomatic corps, he thought he'd seen everything. But Nova Celestra was something else entirely, a metropolis of living crystal that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Final approach to the frost chamber, the pilot announced. "Ambassador, are you sure about this? The reports about the princess are just that, reports," James replied firmly. "We're here to build bridges, not spread rumors." But even he couldn't completely dismiss the stories. A princess who turned people to ice with a single look. A curse that had isolated the Celestian royal family for generations. And now he was about to meet her face to face. The shuttle touched down on a landing pad that sparkled like diamonds. James straightened his formal uniform and checked his reflection one last time in the polished surface of the wall. At 42, his dark hair was starting to gray at the temples, but his green eyes were as sharp as ever. Those eyes had helped him read countless alien diplomats across the galaxy. He hoped they wouldn't fail him now. The frost chamber lived up to its name. The vast circular room was carved from a single massive crystal, its faceted walls refracting light in complex patterns. The temperature was well below human comfort levels, but the environmental suit built into his uniform kept him warm. Presenting her radiance, Princess Cassandra of the House of Crystal Light, heir to the throne of Nova Celestra. James turned toward the announcement, and felt his breath catch. The princess was unlike any Celestian he had seen in the briefing materials. Where most of her people were angular and faceted, she was curves and flowing lines. Her skin had the translucent quality of fine crystal, but with an inner warmth that seemed to pulse in time with her movements. A crown of crystal shards floated above her head, catching and splitting light into rainbow cascades. She kept her eyes downcast, James noticed, even as she glided forward with ethereal grace. "Welcome to Nova Celestra, Ambassador Nash. I trust your journey was comfortable." Her voice was musical, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. James bowed deeply. "Most comfortable, Your Radiance. Thank you for receiving us." "You know why I cannot look at you directly," she said softly. "The stories you have heard are true. My gaze brings only ice and death." James straightened, studying her carefully. There was something in her voice, not pride or anger, but a deep sadness. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "the stories don't tell the whole truth." Her head tilted slightly, though she still didn't look up. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Ambassador." "I've been called both," he admitted with a slight smile. "But I prefer to make my own judgments rather than rely on stories." A whisper of something, amusement, interest, crossed her crystalline features. Then you are doubly dangerous. Please, be seated. We have much to discuss. As they began their negotiations, James found himself fascinated by the way she commanded the room without ever meeting anyone's eyes. Her knowledge of interstellar politics was impressive, her arguments for trade agreements both logical and passionate. But there was something else, something in the way she held herself apart, not with arrogance, but with a bone-deep loneliness that called to something in him. Hours passed like minutes. The initial trade proposals were exchanged, diplomatic pleasantries observed. But as the meeting drew to a close, James made a decision that would change both their worlds forever. "Your Radiance," he said, rising from his seat. "If I may be so bold, I would like to look into your eyes." The chamber went deadly silent. The Celestrian advisors drew back in horror. But Cassandra remained still, her face turned away. "You know what will happen," she whispered. "I know what everyone says will happen," James corrected gently. "But I'm willing to take that chance." "Why?" For the first time, there was real emotion in her voice, confusion, fear, and something like hope. James took a careful step forward. "Because I believe there's more to your curse than meets the eye. And because sometimes the only way to break the ice is to risk being frozen." Slowly, so slowly, Cassandra raised her head. Their eyes met, crystal blue against forest green. James felt a cold rush through his body, saw frost begin to form on his skin. But he held her gaze, smiling slightly even as the cold crept deeper. "You're freezing," she gasped, starting to look away. "Not yet," he managed through chattering teeth. "And I'm still here." The frost continued to spread, but something else was happening too. Where their eyes remained locked, James felt warmth beginning to pulse through him, not his own warmth, but something older, deeper, like the first thaw of spring after a long winter. And in that moment, as human determination met Celestrian curse, both of them realized that everything they thought they knew about their worlds was about to change forever. Breaking the ice. The news spread through Nova Celestra like wildfire. The human ambassador had survived the princess's gaze. James found himself at the center of a political storm, with Celestrian scientists demanding to study him and Earth's diplomatic corps calling for his immediate recall. But he couldn't forget the warmth he'd felt in that moment of connection, or the look of wonder in Cassandra's crystal blue eyes. "You're being reckless," his aide, Trevor, warned as James prepared for another meeting with the princess. "The High Council is saying you've been compromised." James adjusted his ceremonial sash, a gift from the Celestrian court. "They're not wrong," he admitted with a slight smile. "But not in the way they think." The frost chamber felt different now. The crystal walls seemed to pulse with a warmer light, and the ever-present chill didn't bite quite so deeply. Cassandra waited for him, and this time she didn't look away. "The scientists tell me you should be dead," she said by way of greeting. "Or at least frozen solid. I've never been good at meeting expectations." James moved closer, noting how the crystal crown above her head sparkled more intensely as he approached. "Besides, I think we both know there's more to your curse than simple ice magic." Cassandra's crystalline features softened. "Walk with me, Ambassador. There's something I need to show you." She led him deep into the crystal palace, past chambers that hummed with ancient power and corridors that sang with harmonic resonances. Finally, they reached a sealed door marked with symbols that made James's eyes water. "This is the Chamber of First Light," Cassandra explained, placing her hand on the door. Frost patterns spread from her touch, but instead of sealing the door, they formed a key. "No one but the royal family has entered here in generations." The chamber beyond took James's breath away. A massive crystal hung suspended in the center, pulsing with rainbow light. Around it, holographic images played out scenes from Celestrian history. 300 years ago, Cassandra began, her voice soft, "we were at war with the Void Collective. They sought to harness our crystal technology for weapons. My ancestor, Queen Sealnora, discovered a way to channel the crystal's power through her own body to create an ultimate defense. The freezing curse, James realized. It worked too well. The Void Collective retreated, but the power changed her, and all her descendants. We became living weapons, unable to connect with our own people. Cassandra's voice caught. Unable to love. James watched the holographic images shift, showing generations of isolated rulers, each bearing the same crystal crown. Until now, he said quietly. Cassandra turned to him, frost swirling around her feet. Why? Why can you resist it? Maybe because I'm human. James suggested, but something told him that wasn't the whole answer. Or maybe because when I look at you, I don't see a weapon or a curse. I see someone who's carried an impossible burden alone for far too long. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When his fingers touched her crystalline skin, frost immediately began to spread up his arm. But beneath it, he felt that same warmth from before, stronger now. You're doing it again, she whispered, watching the frost patterns with fascination. Fighting the cold. Not fighting, James corrected, taking her other hand despite the growing chill. Accepting it. Like accepting that sometimes the most diplomatic solution is to break all the rules. Their eyes met, and this time the cold rush was accompanied by something else, a surge of energy that made the great crystal pulse brighter. Cassandra gasped as warmth flooded through her, momentarily turning her crystalline skin almost human-like. That's not supposed to be possible, she breathed. I'm getting that a lot lately. James smiled, even as frost continued to creep across his skin. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Before she could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the palace. The crystal's light turned red, and the temperature in the chamber dropped dramatically. The Void Collective, Cassandra said, her eyes widening in horror. They're back. But how? Because they never really left, a new voice interrupted. They turned to see Lord Frost, head of the High Council, entering the chamber with armed guards. They simply waited, planned, and placed their pieces carefully. You're working with them, James realized, finally understanding why the council had been so opposed to his presence. All this time, you've been their agent. For generations, Lord Frost smiled coldly. Keeping the curse alive, ensuring the royal family remained isolated and weak. And now you, human, threaten to undo everything with your inexplicable immunity. The guards raised their crystal weapons, but Cassandra stepped forward, ice spreading from her feet in a deadly wave. You used my family, she said, her voice ringing with power. Used our pain to serve our enemies. And now, Lord Frost's smile turned cruel. You'll watch as we use your new weakness against you. Take the human. The temperature dropped to lethal levels as Cassandra and James stood back to back, frost and determination their only weapons against enemies who had been plotting for centuries. The final confrontation was about to begin, and the fate of two worlds hung in the balance. Hearts of crystal. The chamber erupted into chaos. Crystal weapons fired, sending shards of deadly energy ricocheting off the walls. James felt Cassandra's power surge through their connected hands as she deflected the attacks with walls of ice. Your touch should have killed him by now, Lord Frost snarled, his perfect composure cracking. What are you? James laughed despite the dire situation. Just a diplomat who never learned when to look away. He ducked under a crystal blast, pulling Cassandra with him behind a frozen barrier. Though I'm starting to think there's more to it than that. Cassandra's eyes widened as she looked at their joined hands. Where their skin touched, her crystalline surface had taken on a warm, almost human glow. The prophecy, she whispered. The one they tried to erase from our histories. Less prophecy, more shooting, James suggested as another blast shattered their ice shield. But he couldn't deny his curiosity. Though I wouldn't mind hearing about it once we're not dying. They moved together as if they'd fought side by side for years. Every time the guards tried to separate them, their combined powers created defenses neither could have managed alone. Ice walls that reflected energy blasts back at their attackers. Frost patterns that trapped their enemies' feet. And through it all, that strange warmth kept growing between them. Enough. Lord Frost raised his hands, and the very air began to crystallize. I've spent too long maintaining this curse to let you break it now. The Void Collective requires your power, Princess, and they will have it, with or without your cooperation. The temperature plummeted further. James felt his environmental suit struggling to compensate, its systems crackling with frost. But he refused to let go of Cassandra's hand. You know, he said conversationally, I'm getting really tired of people trying to use you as a weapon. The feeling is mutual, Cassandra replied, a hint of humor in her voice despite their situation. Then her tone turned serious. James, I need you to trust me. The prophecy speaks of a joining of worlds, crystal and flesh, ice and warmth. What we've been feeling. I think I know how to use it. I trusted you enough to look into your eyes, James reminded her. Whatever you're planning, I'm with you. Cassandra turned to face him fully, her crystal crown pulsing with power. Then look at me again, Ambassador. And this time, don't fight the cold at all. Let it in completely. James met her gaze without hesitation. This time, when the frost began spreading across his skin, he didn't resist. He let the cold sink into his bones, into his very cells. It was like diving into an frozen lake, the shock of it nearly stopped his heart. But then something extraordinary happened. As the cold reached his core, it transformed into pure energy. He felt Cassandra's essence merging with his own, ice and warmth creating something entirely new. Their joined hands blazed with light that was neither human nor celestian. Impossible, Lord Frost breathed, taking a step back. The prophecy was just a myth. A story to keep the peasants hoping. You're wrong, Cassandra's voice echoed with power. My ancestor didn't create a curse. She created a bridge, one that could only be crossed when both sides were ready to trust completely. The light around them grew blinding. James felt knowledge flowing into his mind, centuries of Celestian history, the true nature of their crystal technology, and the real reason the Void Collective feared this union so much. They didn't want to keep us apart to maintain the curse, he realized. They wanted to prevent us from discovering what we could become together. As if in response to his words, crystal began growing across his skin, not the deadly frost of before, but living crystal that pulsed with human warmth. At the same time, Cassandra's crystalline form softened, taking on more human characteristics while maintaining her ethereal beauty. The guard's weapons sputtered and died as the energy in the chamber shifted. Lord Frost's own crystal enhancements began to crack, revealing the void tech implants beneath. You see what they did to me, he snarled, his aristocratic facade crumbling along with his crystalline features. What they promised to do for all of us. Perfect fusion of crystal and technology. No more weakness, no more need for human allies. All I see, Cassandra said softly, is someone who chose fear over hope. Forces of frost answering ice flame. She raised their joined hands, and James felt power surge through him unlike anything he'd ever experienced. A wave of energy exploded outward, not destroying the crystal technology but transforming it. Where it touched the guards, their weapons transformed into tools of peace. Where it reached the palace walls, the ever-present chill warmed to a comfortable temperature. Lord Frost screamed as the wave hit him, his void tech implants dissolving into harmless crystal dust. He collapsed, no longer the imposing figure who had manipulated Celestian politics for generations, but simply a tired old man who had given up his humanity for a false promise of power. As the energy faded, James looked down at his transformed body in amazement. Crystal patterns swirled across his skin like luminous tattoos, fading and reappearing with his heartbeat. Well, he said with a small smile, this is going to make diplomatic meetings more interesting. Cassandra laughed, a sound of pure joy that made the crystals around them sing in harmony. I think, Ambassador, we've moved well beyond traditional diplomacy. But before they could explore their new connection further, emergency alarms began blaring throughout the palace. On the holographic displays, dozens of Void Collective ships were emerging from hyperspace. Perfect timing, James sighed, feeling crystal armor automatically forming across his body in response to the threat. I don't suppose that prophecy of yours mentions anything about how to stop an invasion. Cassandra's eyes gleamed with both human warmth and crystalline power. It doesn't have to. We'll write our own ending. Hand in hand, human diplomat and crystal princess turned to face the coming storm, their unified power lighting up the chamber like a newborn star. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time in centuries, both their worlds had hoped for a future without walls of ice between them.